When the Boeing B-29 Superfortress first appeared in Japanese skies, it seemed more like a moving city than an aircraft. With its colossal wingspan, gleaming silver body, and engines powerful enough to carry it across oceans, the bomber shattered everything the Imperial Japanese military thought they knew about air warfare. To civilians below, it was a terrifying omen. Huge, fast, and flying at heights few Japanese fighters could reach. For Japanese commanders, it was a nightmare. The enemy now had a machine capable of striking directly at the home islands, exposing Japan's vulnerability for the first time in the war. First sightings: the giant in the sky. When the first B-29 Superfortresses appeared in the skies over Asia in 1944, Japanese airmen were stunned. From the ground, their massive shape seemed almost unreal. With a wingspan of 141 feet, nearly the size of a football field, and a gleaming silver body that caught the sunlight, the B-29 didn't look like a conventional bomber. It looked like an airborne battleship. Compared to the B-17 and B-24, which Japan had fought before, this new machine was in a class of its own. Its sheer size was intimidating, and to the average observer, it appeared almost too heavy to fly. At first, Japanese analysts dismissed it as another example of American over-engineering. The assumption was simple. The B-29 was too big, too heavy, and too fuel-hungry to pose a real threat. They expected it to be slow, clumsy, and vulnerable to interception. Pilots were told to treat it as a bigger version of the Flying Fortress, an aircraft that could be destroyed with aggressive frontal or tail attacks. This illusion, however, shattered the moment Japanese fighters actually engaged. As the first interceptions unfolded, pilots discovered the bomber was cruising at altitudes above 30,000 feet, a height where most Japanese aircraft could barely operate. Engines overheated during the climb, guns froze, and oxygen ran low. The few fighters that reached the B-29s were greeted with another shock. The Superfortress was not defenseless. Its advanced fire control system allowed remote-controlled turrets to lay down blistering fields of .50 caliber fire. Approaches from almost any angle were covered. Survivors described being hammered by perfectly coordinated bursts before they could even squeeze off a round. Formation tactics amplified the threat. B-29s flew in disciplined waves overlapping their defenses so that each bomber became part of a floating fortress wall. Attacks from the rear were met with multiple turrets firing at once. Head-on runs turned into suicide charges. What Japanese planners had dismissed as a lumbering giant proved to be a fortress in every sense of the word. For civilians on the ground, the sight was unforgettable. The B-29's deep engine rumble rolled across cities long before bombs fell, creating a chilling prelude to destruction. Its size, its altitude, and its invulnerability combined into a single terrifying message. Japan's skies no longer belong to Japan. Historical context: Japan's air defense before the B-29. To understand why the B-29 shocked Japan so profoundly, one must look at the state of Japanese air defense before its arrival. By 1942 and 1943, Japan had built its doctrine around intercepting medium-range bombers and engaging in short, decisive air battles. The Mitsubishi A6M0 and the Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa dominated these encounters. Both were agile, lightweight fighters, perfectly suited to the maneuver-oriented combat Japan believed would decide the war. Against bombers like the B-25 Mitchell or the occasional B-17, these interceptors performed well enough, relying on close-in dogfighting and concentrated bursts of firepower. Anti-aircraft artillery was calibrated to similar expectations. Slower planes flying at altitudes well under 20,000 feet. By 1944, however, cracks were already forming. Fuel shortages were crippling flight training programs, leaving younger pilots underprepared. Radar coverage was patchy. limiting early warning of incoming raids. Anti-aircraft units often fired blind, wasting ammunition. Japan's once vaunted veteran corps of pilots was dwindling, replaced by inexperienced recruits with far fewer flight hours. Despite these problems, Japanese commanders still clung to the idea that their defensive doctrine, fast interceptors, aggressive tactics, and sacrificial bravery would hold. The B-29 obliterated this assumption. Instead of flying low and slow, it cruised high above 30,000 feet at speeds over 350 miles per hour. Its turbo-supercharged engines gave it performance in an entirely different league. For interceptors like the Ki-44 Shoki, climbing to interception altitude meant pushing engines to the point of failure. Many fighters ran out of fuel before they even reached firing range. Even when they managed to engage, the B-29's overlapping turret fire turned each approach into a gauntlet. Flak units were equally helpless. Japanese 75mm and 88mm guns, effective against earlier bombers, simply couldn't reach the B-29's ceiling. Shells exploded thousands of feet below, wasting precious ammunition. Engineers scrambled to design heavier guns, but shortages of steel, explosives, and trained crews meant defenses never caught up. The result was devastating. Within months of its debut, the B-29 had exposed Japan's defenses as obsolete. The very foundation of their strategy, short-range, maneuver-based combat, was irrelevant against a bomber designed for altitude, speed, and range. The Superfortress wasn't just another American aircraft. It was proof that the technological and industrial gap had grown too wide for Japan to close. Technical shock. Superfortress capabilities through Japanese eyes. As Japanese intelligence gathered more details about the B-29, disbelief turned into alarm. Reports from captured documents and pilot observations painted a picture of an aircraft that seemed years ahead of anything Japan could field. Its four Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, each turbo-supercharged, allowed it to climb higher and fly faster than any Japanese bomber or interceptor. Its maximum speed of over 350 miles per hour and service ceiling above 30,000 feet placed it beyond the reach of most of Japan's fighter force. The bomber's range was perhaps its most shocking attribute. With a combat radius exceeding 1,500 miles, the B-29 could launch from distant bases and still strike deep into the Japanese mainland. This nullified Japan's reliance on geographical distance as a form of defense. Cities once thought untouchable, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, were now within reach. Even more unsettling was its defensive system. Unlike conventional bombers with manually operated gun turrets, the B-29 employed remote-controlled stations directed through a central computer sighting system. Each turret could be manned by gunners directing overlapping fields of fire, creating a deadly umbrella of protection. Japanese pilots attempting frontal or tail attacks quickly learned the danger. Casualty rates for interceptors rose sharply, further eroding already depleted squadrons. Japanese intelligence reports noted with alarm the bomber's pressurized cabins, which allowed crews to operate at high altitude without oxygen masks, reducing fatigue and increasing mission endurance. Add to this its ability to carry up to 20,000 pounds of bombs, nearly double what Japanese bombers typically carried, and the Superfortress appeared less like an aircraft and more like a moving arsenal. What shocked Japan most wasn't simply the bomber's specifications, but what they implied. America's industrial and technological power had produced a machine Japan could not match. For the first time, Japanese strategists were forced to accept that the air war had entered an entirely new era. Early engagements, testing Japan's defenses. The first real test of the B-29 against Japanese defenses came in June 1944, when bombers flying from bases in China struck the steelworks at Yawata on Kyushu. Though the raid involved only a handful of aircraft, it stunned the Japanese high command. For the first time in the war, Japan's industrial heartland, once thought beyond reach, was under direct assault. Pilots scrambled to intercept, but most Japanese fighters could not climb quickly enough to reach the bombers before they completed their runs. Those that did found themselves outgunned by the B-29's interlocking defensive turrets. As raids grew in intensity, the inadequacy of Japan's defenses became glaring. Anti-aircraft crews fired thousands of rounds, only to watch their bursts explode harmlessly below the high-flying formations. Reports from squadrons returning to base told the same story. The B-29s came in fast, dropped their loads with precision, and left with minimal losses. Japan's traditional reliance on Zeros and light interceptors failed completely against the altitude and speed advantage of the Superfortress. Civilian morale also began to falter. The sight of enormous bombers glinting in the sun, far out of reach, left the population with a growing sense of helplessness. Unlike the occasional nuisance raids of earlier years, these bombers were systematic, relentless, and unshakable. The Imperial General Headquarters attempted to downplay their impact in official reports, but the truth was inescapable. For the Japanese military, early encounters forced an uncomfortable realization. Their air defense network was fundamentally obsolete. This was not a temporary nuisance, but an existential threat. Unless countermeasures could be devised, the B-29s had the potential to cripple Japan's industrial base and break the morale of its people. Tactical adaptations. Desperate measures in the skies. Confronted with the B-29's staggering performance, Japan scrambled to develop countermeasures. The first approach was to adapt existing fighters. Aircraft such as the Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki and later the Ki-84 Hayate were rushed into high-altitude interceptor roles, stripped of weight and fitted with boosted engines. But even these advanced fighters struggled to match the Superfortress at cruising altitude. Their climb rates were insufficient, and fuel shortages meant few sorties could be sustained. Desperation drove innovation, though often at great cost. Pilots were ordered to attempt ramming attacks, Terran tactics, against the bombers. Accounts tell of Japanese aviators deliberately crashing their planes into B-29 formations, hoping to break up raids by sacrificing themselves. Some units were even specifically organized for this grim duty. While these tactics occasionally inflicted damage, they also decimated already depleted squadrons. Night operations offered another avenue. Modified night fighters like the Nakajima J-1N1S Gecko were equipped with primitive radar and upward-firing cannons, attempting to ambush B-29s under the cover of darkness. Results were mixed. While some successes were achieved, radar technology in Japan lagged far behind Allied systems, and interceptions remained rare. Anti-aircraft defenses were also overhauled. New high-altitude flak guns were deployed, but production delays and material shortages meant coverage was thin. Moreover, American planners quickly adapted, shifting raid altitudes and later switching to low-level night firebombing runs that rendered much of Japan's defensive effort ineffective. Ultimately, these adaptations amounted to buying time rather than solving the problem. Every measure was reactive, costly, and stretched Japan's already failing war economy. The B-29's relentless presence forced Japan into a spiral of desperation, bleeding men, machines, and resources in battles it could not hope to win. Psychological impact. Fear from above. If the B-29 broke Japan's defenses physically, it also broke them psychologically. Before its arrival, Japanese pilots and civilians clung to the belief that the home islands were untouchable. The war might rage across Asia and the Pacific, but the heart of Japan was sacred ground. The Superfortress destroyed that illusion. For fighter pilots, the fear was twofold. They knew they were outmatched in altitude, speed, and firepower, and each mission carried the likelihood of death with little chance of success. Accounts from surviving aviators describe the frustration of empty guns, overheated engines, and watching B-29s fly calmly overhead, immune to their attacks. The bomber formations came to symbolize futility itself, targets that could be seen but not effectively reached. For civilians, the psychological strain was even greater. When the bombing campaign shifted from precision strikes to incendiary fire raids in 1945, cities became tinderboxes. Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe burned under relentless nighttime infernos. Survivors recalled the roar of B-29s overhead, followed by the hellish firestorms consuming entire neighborhoods. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming. No fighter squadrons swooping to the rescue, no defenses strong enough to shield them. By mid-1945, Japanese society lived in constant dread of the superfortress. Its deep hum became synonymous with death from above. Unlike earlier raids, these attacks were not occasional disruptions, but a sustained campaign of destruction. The superfortress had transformed the war into a daily nightmare for civilians and combatants alike. Fear turned into inevitability. The Japanese people began to internalize the idea that defeat was no longer a matter of if, but when. In this way, the B-29 waged psychological warfare as devastating as the bombs it carried. Legacy: the B-29 as a symbol of inevitable defeat. The legacy of the B-29 in Japan was not only measured in destroyed factories or burned cities, but in the collapse of a nation's confidence. Militarily, it revealed the yawning gap between American and Japanese technology. While Japan struggled to fuel and maintain outdated interceptors, the US fielded a bomber that embodied industrial might, innovation, and logistical reach on a scale Japan could not hope to match. Its most infamous role came in August 1945, when two B-29s, Enola Gay and Bockscar, delivered the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In that moment, the superfortress ceased to be just a bomber. It became the ultimate symbol of modern warfare's destructive potential. The Japanese leadership could no longer deny that the war was lost, and the B-29 was the weapon that had carried defeat to their doorstep. For Japanese pilots and commanders, memories of the superfortress carried bitter lessons. It demonstrated that wars of attrition and industrial power would decide the future, not individual valor or tactical brilliance. The fighter versus fighter ethos that had guided Japan's air doctrine was rendered obsolete by a machine that operated outside those parameters. For civilians, the B-29 became the most enduring image of the war, the silver giant that rained destruction on their cities. In post-war memoirs and histories, it often appears not just as an enemy aircraft, but as a symbol of inevitability, the embodiment of overwhelming force that no sacrifice could overcome. In the end, Japan came to view the superfortress not as a single weapon, but as the harbinger of a new age of warfare. Its legacy was both destruction and revelation, proof that the world of aerial combat had shifted irreversibly, and that Japan's defeat was sealed long before the final bombs fell. In the end, the B-29 Superfortress was not merely a bomber, it was a harbinger of Japan's inevitable collapse. From the first shimmering glimpse of its massive silhouette to the final apocalyptic missions over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it represented something far larger than a machine of war. It embodied America's unmatched industrial power, its relentless technological innovation, and its ability to strike at the very heart of an enemy once thought untouchable. For Japan, the superfortress was a lesson written in fire across its cities. Valor and sacrifice could not compensate for technological inferiority and dwindling resources. It left behind not only smoking ruins, but a permanent scar on the nation's collective memory. Even today, the deep hum of a surviving B-29 at an airshow evokes awe and dread in equal measure. If you want more untold stories of legendary aircraft, make sure to subscribe for the next chapter.